Facilities Master Plan Committee. I'm calling this meeting to order. Calling the Facilities Master Plan Committee meeting, May 26, 2021 to order. Can we get a roll call?
Chair Negron.
Here.
Mike Alcock. Lee Cole.
Here.
Manny Clark.
Here.
Sanai Hanks. Stephen Hardwick.
Here.
Madison Hughes.
Here.
Tom Knosman. I see him on here. You're muted, Tom.
I'm here, sorry.
You're okay. Charity Martin King.
Here.
D. Mahi Medina Cortez. Jawanza Moore. Carl Moore Jr. Safi Miyoki. Safi, go ahead and do that again.
I'm here.
Hafsa Musa. Margarita Ravilla. D. Lena Scales. Julia Lynn Walker.
Here.
Cecily Winjama.
Here.
And Tiffany White. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the 4/23 meeting minutes, our last meeting?
So moved. This is Mike, Region 3. Misty, I'm here as well. Sorry I'm late.
A second?
Second,
Who was that?
Lee Cole.
Thank you, Lee Cole. Sorry, it's hard to do it. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion or any objections? Hearing no objections, the minutes are approved. So welcome, everyone. As we start this meeting, this is going to be another exciting meeting. We're going to talk about the 3 pillars of the portrait of a graduate. How does facilities support that? The portrait of a graduate is extremely important. And how do the facilities support that journey? What does communication mean to us? And reimagine how facilities will support the journey. So this is a very important time for us. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Dixon for her opening remarks. Dr. Dixon.
Thank you, Chair Negron, and thank you to all of our committee members who are on with us tonight. This is a fascinating and exciting time for Columbus City Schools as we continue this conversation around the facilities master plan. And one thing that is important is that we don't forget the purpose of these buildings, that we hope to make new spaces for our kids. And it's not just a physical structure, although we want buildings that are new and nice and have all of the amenities. We must also ensure that these facilities create an opportunity for students to be creative and innovative. Those are the type of spaces that we need in our district. And we've seen, as I stated before, we've seen through this pandemic, students make innovative spaces in their own homes. You may go on a Zoom meeting and you see kids who've built a tent, or they're outside by a tree, or they're sitting on the front porch. They have created spaces in their homes that they believe helps them learn and helps them thrive and be creative. And we want those same type of spaces in the future of schools that we co-design with your help. So when we talk about the portrait of a graduate, the board charged me when I started in the district on this journey of a strategic plan. And one of the things I asked them to do is, can we start with a community conversation about what are our hopes and dreams and aspirations for our students? So and I was very intentional that wouldn't just be the superintendent's plan. It would be a community brainstorming, a community coming together with those ideas. And the board said, absolutely. So we started that journey with Battelle for Kids as our partner. And we decided, what is it that we want our students to know? Every single student that comes to Columbus City Schools, what is it that is important for them to leave us with when they graduate? And that's how we came up with 6 pillars. We decided, and that means all the partners, over 100 people who have been working with us since December of 2019, when we started the portrait work. And there were 6 things that the community and those committees said we wanted for our students. We wanted adaptability, communication, creativity, critical thinking, global empathy, and technology. Those are the skills that we wanted for every single student. And so then the board says, yes, we agree, superintendent, but we also want you to memorialize that. What does that look like? How can you bring evidence to us that our students have mastered these 6 things? And that is the work that we're currently doing now. We've partnered with Columbus State. They're helping us craft the student experiences for our secondary students. And we have Columbus City School teachers that are creating those capstone projects for our students K through 8. So you're going to begin to see students have the opportunity to earn a Portrait of Graduate seal on their diploma. They're going to be able to demonstrate that they've mastered these 6 pillars. Now, you may be thinking, well, what does it have to do with our school buildings, right? So when we think about the buildings and what we want for our students, there have to be some connection there, right? So when we think about critical thinking, we want our students to be able to think critically, but what is a space? We have to make sure that there's space for that in our schools and outside of our schools. Creativity. When you think about artists, right? There's so many students, I walked outside and that gave me energy to be able to paint this portrait. How do we make sure that our schools have those creative spaces too? We don't want our students to come back to rows of desks and chalkboards in the front. Those days are gone. We want to be able to create spaces that possibly our community can use. When you think about, could we have a class that ends at 4:00 and then we bring community in at 5:00 and join students and community for a creative class? Absolutely, when we have that space. We talk about the workforce development. How can we make sure that we have industries that are partnering with us to use our facilities, or our students go and use those facilities? That we don't have to send students outside if they wanted to be HVAC specialists. We can create opportunities in our own school buildings where those workforce experts can come to our students. So it's creating more space for career and technology opportunities for our students, career tech. Global empathy. We're now partnering with the Columbus Zoo. We want to be able to have projects for our kindergartners to know, what does empathy mean, right? We've seen a lot of that through the pandemic. What does it mean to be in someone else's shoes? So we really have compassion about people and things. How can we make sure our students have those experiences? So when we think about the Portrait of a Graduate, the 6 pillars, these are the things that we want our students to be able to demonstrate. We have to make sure that the space that we create are conducive to that. So we're going to come back. We're with some students at our next meeting. We're going to talk about some students that are going to be able to tell you what these 6 pillars mean to them through their eyes, because I think it's very important, because it's not just our high school students who would have the benefit of these buildings, where we think about the plan of starting to build, but we're talking about the elementary and the middle school students, especially those elementary students. How can we make sure that we're building future thriving spaces for our students in a community to utilize and make sure that our students are leading the way. That is what our mantra is. Our students leading the way. We're co-designing their educational experiences in these new spaces that we're going to create. So just want to kind of open up with that, Chair Negron, and just kind of wanted people to understand how this process is different and how the process started in December of 2019 with the conversations about what we want for our graduates, to the strategic plan. We have our board goals and guardrails. Now it's time to say, what would these buildings look like, so that all of these things that we've agreed upon that we want for our students can happen, and happen in spaces that students love learning in. So thank you for this opportunity just to share that with our team this morning, this evening rather.
Thanks, Dr. That's pretty exciting, though. Gets the juices flowing.
Yes.
Yeah.
We hope so.
Yep.
We hope so. Yes.
Yep. Well, thank you. What I'd like to do is turn it over to Dennis with Leggett Architects to just talk about the review of the master plan process. Dennis?
Thank you very much. I'm just getting my presentation started here. Okay, good evening, everyone. Just going to take everybody through the agenda of the evening. And again, as Chairman Negron mentioned, that this is a recap of where we are today, both in the process and the portion that we just finished. Dr. Dixon, it's a pleasure to be in front of you again. Thank you very much for that introduction. First off, just wanted to kick off the evening by introducing the fact that this goal is, and something that Dr. Dixon just mentioned, is for every student in the district. And we want this process to be as interactive as possible and as transparent as possible. The more voices we hear, the better the plan will be. We understand that everyone may not be able to attend the community discussions, but all previous information and all previous recordings are on the Facility Master Plan webpage. This QR code that you're seeing is a live code. So we can use this. If you hold your device up to it, you will be directed to the Master Plan website, the webpage. You will find future surveys, which we will be having in very short order, previous meeting minutes and summaries, the FAQ sheets, and the email address should you have to contact us for any questions. Over the course of the planning process, the three faces that you have seen prepare the presentations and facilitate is Robin Randall, Melva Williams-Aurgau, and myself. So again, we are so excited to help you through this process, and you will be seeing a lot of us as we continue forward. Some of the other design partners that we have will be more involved as we start getting into some of the conceptual design of what the master plan will be. To review the process, the 5-step collaborative master plan process includes the phases gather, envision, define, consider, and transform. In each phase, the community engagement process is a crucial part of creating the master plan. Each step of this process is to create consensus of community values and a full and clear understanding of what the community's expectations are for its future learning environments. Notice that the first 3 phases are problem defining and the second 2 are problem solving. What this means is we are not designing anything until we've gone through the first 3 phases to understand completely what is needed. The process started in April 2021 and is scheduled to be completed in December of 2021. Your input in these community discussions will be the foundation, and the surveys as well will be the foundations of the facility master plan that will be reviewed by Columbus City Schools Board of Education, administration, and staff. Approval of the master plan is scheduled for March of 2022. In April, for the gather phase, we completed a survey, participated in regional community discussions, and the Facility Master Plan Committee convened to discuss the successes and barriers to learning in your existing school buildings. There were many items that were revealed in the discussions relating to what is working or not within Columbus City Schools. This month was the envision phase. The second phase of the process starts the discussion of how successes can be elevated and the barriers can be addressed within your schools. The discussions you had for the envision phase will lead to a program of space and place within the schools. This program will be used to start establishing master plan concepts and future community discussions starting in the fall of 2021. To recap a little bit, the gather phase has many steps because we are trying to learn as much information as we possibly can. The items that you see highlighted in yellow, that's what we emphasized during our community discussions. The items that you see highlighted in gray, those were items that we were planning to do coinciding with the community discussions, but due to the challenges of COVID-19, the design team and the planning team felt it inappropriate to intervene in the school buildings at this time. So we'll be handling all of that work over the course of the summer. What did we learn? What are the aspects of schools do you feel are successful for education? These are a few of the bullet points that seem to summarize collectively from one region to the next. The availability of pathways and choices, communications from students to teachers has improved, the pride of the cultural and ethnic diversity within the district, the dedication, commitment, engagement and concern and the level of care for the teaching staff of the students, and of course, the resiliency of the students and their ability to adapt to change. Some of the challenges or barriers, the lacking in sensory or intervention spaces, the status and the state of all schools are not equitable across all regions, the inequality of facility improvements, and lacking in specialized spaces, in particular for art, music, and gym. Now, for step 2, what were the goals and expectations of this month? And obviously, as Dr. Dixon stated, those went immediately to 3 pillars of a portrait of a graduate. Again, we did have one aspect that through our, as to coincide with the community engagement discussions, we do have some portions that we were not able to due to the challenges that we'll schedule this summer. And that's, we have some regional facilities that are fairly new that we would like to explore. And we're hoping to have an opportunity to at least, even if we can get some imagery of them, or if we could possibly get at them, but we're still working those details out as we move through the summer. But again, as Dr. Dixon said, that last item was something that we really wanted to discuss, was imagine the future potential of your district. I would like to turn it over temporarily to Mr. Mike Nicholson from Battelle. He had part of his presentation as well that we discussed during the Envision presentation. Mr. Nicholson.
Thanks, Dennis. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Nicholson with Battelle for Kids. And as you know, you may know that we partner with Columbus City Schools to help facilitate the development of their strategic plan. And as part of that process, one of the earliest stages was the development of the Portrait of a Graduate, which represented the envisioning stage, where the district wanted to be with its graduates 5-10 years out. That development of the Portrait of a Graduate was significant, not only with regard to the substance, but the signaling of an important shift with regard to broadening the notions of success for students, moving beyond content acquisition, the 3 hours, so to speak, to broadening out what the competencies we need in our students to maximize the chances for their success now and in the future. And as that relates to the facilities, I think there's some important parallels and important supports that we need to talk about. Yesterday's 3 hours, when content acquisition might have been more the centerpiece of schooling, school districts might have been able to get away with more rigid and institutional learning environments. As we've learned through some of this process, that yesterday's schools was helping to support and develop students for a very different world they'd be walking into. That world doesn't exist anymore. Now with the broadening of success, the notion of success with the 6 competencies that Dr. Dixon was talking about, I think we seriously need to reconsider the learning environments that are necessary. And some of those considerations are at the bottom of that screen. We really have to talk about the rebalancing of rigid versus flexible structures, perhaps moving away from more of that institutional feel and institutional look of the schools, because they send important cues about what's supported, what is needed, closed versus open spaces, natural versus artificial light. And probably one of the biggest cues, are we looking for students who are compliant or students who are empowered? Those are among the considerations that we need to discuss or talk about with rebalancing. Next slide, please. One of the biggest characterizations of these facilities you might need to talk about is the degree to which they are flexible. As we know, the educators, the teachers, they can't force anybody to learn, but they help to set the conditions to make learning more possible. And to the degree that we can give teachers and the educators more tools, more ways to manipulate the environment so that they can choose different ways of supporting whatever the needs are at the time, we'll give them a richer toolbox to draw from. Another important consideration is, what is 21st century motivation? In too many places, not just schools at all, but corporations, schools, families are still drawing from a 19th and 20th century motivation model where behaviorism runs large, rewards and punishments. We know for the type of learning and the work that we are providing for our kids right now, that doesn't work. That doesn't predict or explain nearly the range of behavior we need for them. With the critical thinking, the creativity, these are much broader cognitions that we need to support. And rewards and punishments actually restrict and constrict that. It's autonomy, competence, and relatedness that we need to support. And that autonomy, especially when you're working with a district as large as this, how do we support all those different forms of autonomy out there with a very rigid environment? We need to give the teachers and the students as much choice as possible for supporting this type of learning for these higher cognitions that we're talking about. Most people are motivated by having control over their behavior. To the degree that they feel like they're being constrained and restricted, they'll likely become demotivated. So there's very much a close tie between the facilities that we're looking to design and that very important shift that Columbus made with going with redefining the outcomes that they want for their kids that move beyond much of where school has been historically. So that's where we are right now. Who do I turn this over to now? Dennis, is this back to you?
I believe that there was going to be a community discussion amongst these with the co-chairs, and just so they had a chance to speak about their reflections of what the portrait of a graduate is. So there was discussion to me that Mike, you were going to be asking some of the questions, but at least we could have some participation if there's anyone from the co-chairs that would like to contribute. But if there was any questions that you would be available to respond.
You know, can I throw a remark or a comment out here about this?
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering if at times, I know I might have talked to Dr. Stanford about this, is if you look at the 6 competencies that were chosen, that were prioritized with the help of that design team that Dr. Dixon was talking about, with the 125 people that were there, they helped to prioritize these 6 competencies. And one thing that they have in common is, again, they move beyond the content acquisition, and they're pretty high cognitive skills and mindsets that really demand a more flexible environment. I'm wondering if you talk about that as a whole, again, versus trying to develop compliant compliancy that might have been for an earlier era with more of a manufacturing economy, but now we need to tap into and develop the creativity, the critical thinking, the empathy. I'm wondering if we talk about it in that regard versus trying to pin them to specific competencies versus just these stronger, more demanding cognitions.
When you think about the question that's in front of us right now, how do we see facilities supporting the first three of the six portrait of a graduate: adaptability, communication, and global empathy? And I think what we wanted to try to do was go into 3 breakout rooms so that we could have regional chairs kind of talk through and lead, discussions
Sure.
on right. Am I correct, Dennis? Is that?
Honestly, that question, as far as the inner discussion, I would want to refer back to Misty to see if that
Yep.
was the intent.
No, we don't need breakout rooms. We can just do an open discussion in the main
Okay.
room.
All right, thank you. Sorry about that, Miss. So, I think what's important though is when we think about team, right? We're trying to elicit feedback from the community. How do we see the facility supporting the first 3 portraits of a graduate? Adaptability, communication, and global empathy. So, I really open it up to the co-chairs so that we could just have some open discussions on that. So can we talk a little bit about that? Well, I guess we'll go one topic at a time, if that's okay. Dennis, adaptability.
So if you think, so let's start with adaptability. If you want to do one at a time, what do we see as if you were to characterize the current structures in the district versus ones that you might see that support adaptability better? What comes to mind? I know Misty had shared with me that there was an article that was sent out to the committee, and I don't know if you had a chance to read it. It was called Rethinking School Design for the Future of Learning. And the author in there talks about many of the historical structures for schools. He actually called cells and bells, that the kids moved from room to room based on a bell schedule. And to the degree that that was true, does that seem to lend itself to an adaptability type, developing adaptability in students?
So can we get some feedback? How about Region 6?
Hi, this is Manny Clark, and I was about to speak on it anyway because we had a community member. I think his name was Pastor Prince or something similar to that, and we got in the breakout room. He liked what the schools looked like and in terms of the possibilities, but he was so much more curious about like the people and what actually the kids were going to be taught and how they were going to be engaged with, because the spaces were great, but he said they don't matter as much as how we use them and who is in charge of teaching the kids. So we definitely liked the ability to have the outdoor spaces. We definitely liked the ability, they had a certain name for them, but they were basically like garage doors, to where the spaces were opened up and students were allowed to engage in a bigger format with more participants. All of those things were loved. It was just the how that continually came up, like how are we going to use these spaces? And I liked what Dr. Dixon said in terms of engaging the community with the students, like class in there 4, communities in there with students at 5. But none of that's being said to the community. And it was, in our breakout room, we almost didn't get to any of the questions because he wanted to know the how so much more than just what the space was going to look like.
Manny, that's a great comment because that's very true. The culture has to evolve and the culture has to move with the facilities. If the culture doesn't change, or the processes don't change, there is a certain limitation with how much facilities can do. Again, the facilities do send important signals, but you're right, the culture has to evolve with it.
Yeah.
Well, I would say this, and once again, I don't know if everybody knows again, but I manage Douglas Community Center and Milo Grove Community Center, and I'm gonna tell you, with Douglas, we have a partnership with Windsor STEM, Duxbury, and we're still trying to get stronger with Linden High School. But it makes so much more of a difference when the teachers can call us throughout the day and tell us certain things, and we can piggyback back and forth with the kids, the parents, and the teachers. And I'm not saying that has to be just with Community Rec, Parks and Rec, and Columbus City Schools, but I'm saying in terms of this situation, if we put those partnerships that are already involved in the community, it matters, because what actually has been created is that scenario that I grew up in. But when I walked down my neighborhood, my neighbor could call my mom and tell them what I was doing, good or bad. I could have helped take her trash out, or I could have did anything. And it meant so much more in terms of safety, in terms of accountability. And the same thing happens now where they call my community centers and they tell us about kids. And it's the situations actually happen where when a kid left school, we might have had, some resources or some rewards for them according to whatever we heard. So I'm just saying, if we not saying it has to be completely implemented, but if we foster those opportunities and those partnerships now, when the buildings get made, it'll just happen. It's organic.
Manny, Mr. Clark, just Talisa Dixon, thank you so much for sharing that. And you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the reasons when we talk about creating creative spaces, they have to be spaces that that everyone can coexist in. And by that, I mean, it's just not school space, right? So what we've learned during this pandemic is that it takes all of us to wrap our arms around the school district. It's not the school district working in isolation. So if we have an opportunity to build space that is utilized, for example, for the school until 5 o'clock, and partners can come in from 5 to 9, for example, right? That space allows for more of that, those conversations from our partners to our school, because you have space. Right now, we're engaged in partners, and we got to carve out a space here for the partner to have a desk. And, we're trying to take existing space and making it work. And we're not sure that space really fosters creativity from the students, right? It may allow for a desk and a file cabinet, but does it really allow for you to do activities with students outside of the building? To your point, and we both agree too. We've been in places where it didn't matter what the facilities were; students was still thriving. But then when you think about it, man, how much more could that student have? How much more creative could that student be if the environment was even different or more improved? We think about when we go to different places, when you go to a new restaurant, a museum, and you're just fascinated by the furnishing and the paintings, and your eyes just take you to so many different ways. Places that kind of spark that creativity. We want that to happen for our students too. And even when we talk about adaptability, we want them to say, hey, you can go from a museum to the library to the backyard, and you still know how to be innovative. You still know that your work is still important, et cetera. You know how to, have those ebb and flows, because as you grow, you're going to meet different people from different places, and you want to be able to move in those spaces and know how to do that as a young adult. But I totally agree. We want these spaces to be community spaces. I mean, our board members have said time and time again, why don't we have spaces that Park and Recs could use, or swimming pools? We're taking our people, our students, to other places when we could build our buildings with those, we have a one-stop for various organizations to partner with us. So yes, Columbus City Schools is going to continue our partnerships. And yes, that we want those partners to have a say on what these facilities look like. And third, and most importantly, we're not building spaces just for Columbus City Schools kids and employees. We are building spaces for the community, that the community owns, that the community can use, and community has some ownership in the neighborhoods where they're needed, so that those neighborhoods can thrive and have synergy and energy around their schools. Because we saw that happening so much during the pandemic, and we're seeing it continue to happen now. We don't want to have people to have to go across town to visit their schools. If they want a good choice down the street, there's a good choice around the street, around the corner, next to partners who are co-designing those learning experiences for our students before school, during school, and after school. So thank you for your input, but that's the direction that we are definitely headed in.
Yeah, that was helpful, Manny. When you were saying that, you reminded me of, I was telling this story today to someone. In 1984, I was driving across the 59th Street Bridge, and it's relevant to this discussion, so believe me. And I just remember watching this guy in his town car have the first bag phone. And I looked over at him, and I did construction work on government buildings, and I had an old government phone just happened to be in the truck that I was in. And I pulled it up, and he and I laughed, just smiled at each other, right? And I'll never forget that human connection. Well, the point is, in 1999, I went to a conference where this futurist was talking about how our handheld device was going to become our personal computer. So both times my mind was blown by what the future had in front, and look at where we are today. I mean, it's crazy. So what we are trying to envision, and that's why, I appreciate your comments. You were bold. You were the first one to speak. I'd like to hear from, all the different areas. So, thank you for stepping up.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
And this goes to another point that I want to share, but Dr. Dixon brought it up. And she talked about the vocational spaces and how, I think she used HVAC. We could do those in the schools. But one of the things that came up in my community center, and this has been years ago, it makes sense. A lot of these young people don't know what kind of jobs that are available in their community. And at that point, one of the things that came up, and it blew my mind because I didn't know, but they asked, does anybody know how much a meat cutter makes at Kroger? And does anybody know that? They make great money, and it's a certification. It's something that could be done in a high school that would transfer directly to a job right outside of high school. And I'm just using that as an example. And you made me think about it more when you were talking about the cell phones. But how cool would it be if Kroger, Nationwide, OSU Medical Center, and on, recreation and parks, if we could literally have a bridge that go directly from recreation and parks into the workplace. I mean, it's possible in terms of what we're discussing as the schools are being built. I'm done. Appreciate you guys.
Yep. Region 5, co-chairs.
The only thing that really we got out of, well, I shouldn't say the only thing. One of the big things when we're talking about adaptable spaces, we talked about a health and wellness center and making that available to the community for flu shot vaccines, for physicals, for even prenatal care if necessary, where when school lets out, say in high school at 2:30, by 5 o'clock, that center is open until 9 or 10, where you're not trying to have to go outside of your community to get those services. They're right there in the neighborhoods. So adapting that space where you're also letting the community members in, but you can make sure that the whole family is taken care of in that sense, as far as the health aspect of it. And then as far as the wellness piece, they all like the agricultural idea of it, and bringing in some of these, I don't want to call them master gardeners, but we have lots of community gardens all over the city that have some of them also come in and teach the kids new things. And also in this region, there's lots of new Americans, having them grow their staple crop and then doing something culinary with it, where you're bringing the community in and getting to learn about a different culture. There was like, if there was a screen that was in the entrance of the school that said, hello, how are you, in the different languages. That way you can start to communicate with your peers, and even with the children bringing their parents in. If you can say, good evening, how are you? That kind of, you have at least tried to communicate with that parent, even if you can't completely communicate with them, but you're opening that door that you're willing to learn their language and speak to them, and not just translate through their children.
I think those are great comments, Tiffany. I really appreciate all of them. In fact, a little sidebar, but relevant to what you said. I'm building a research facility at Ohio State, and it's a greenhouse, and they're studying how can they better prepare urban environments to grow produce in the area where they would use it. And of course, that's the university is doing that. But could you imagine, schools having things like that? So,
Hey, Jim, can I ask Tiffany a follow-up question?
Oh yeah. Yes.
Hey, Tiffany, check me on this, because I thought that was a really interesting application you use with adaptability. Were you talking about the buildings being more adaptable to being able to host or support, as Dr. Dixon said, the community coming in and using those spaces? Or were you talking about adaptability, developing the competency of adaptability in the students? Or was it both?
It was both. So the Health and Wellness Center, because we have so many, I'll use kindergarten as an example. You have everyone always rushing to try to get into the pediatrician to get those kindergarten shots that are needed. If there was I don't want to call it a clinic, because I want it to be like a whole wellness type concept. But if they could go there, they could get their immunizations, they could get their flu shots. The parents could also do it. I mean, we're in the midst of a pandemic. If the whole family could go and everyone could get their shots at one time, and not the kids get it on this day, I have to go this day. You could all do it in one fell swoop. And as far as the communication, I just, when you meet someone and you can tell that they don't necessarily understand the language, or their English is broken, if you can just say, good morning, good evening, how are you doing? That kind of breaks the ice, where there's not so much apprehension of, I hope I don't say it the wrong way, or I don't know how to answer this question because I don't really understand the language. Because a lot of times, especially in this region, the children are interpreting for the parents who don't have English as their first language. So just bridging that gap. I mean, no one's going to be fluent in all of those languages, but to just be able to even communicate with your peers that may not be as fluent in English as others, you could at least talk to them in small little snippets in their language, because you've seen it on the board coming in the mornings. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a cool way to learn a different language, but it's also a cool way that you can talk to your peers. And then the teachers can communicate with the parents, even if they say, hi, this is Miss White, I'm calling to talk about your son or daughter. And could you give them the phone? If you can say that in their language, then that's breaking that barrier. You know what I mean?
Good examples.
Yeah, really good examples. Yep, good feedback. Anything else, Mike?
No, that helps. Thank you.
Yep. The Region 4?
Who's Region 4?
Region 4 is Safi, Tom, Steve, one of the co-chairs.
Yeah, this is Tom Knosman.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, adaptable would be tremendous. And I think of the schools that we have now, And I don't see any of them being adaptable. They're nothing like we saw last week, nothing where you can, open up a door and it's a smaller room and get to a smaller room or anything like that. So it's just sometimes hard to think about this when we see what we have now. We have the traditional classrooms, and to be close to a rec center would be tremendous. For after school, like we were saying, things like that. And to have a relationship with them, with mentors there for kids. Our rec center that our kids go to, they're not really welcome there. I think they're worried that things are going to, like people are going to get upset over basketball games or get in trouble. To have some older kids there, some kids from Ohio State, Columbus State there to mentor some of the kids would be nice, rather than just people that are kind of managing the facility, like the one that we're near, where the kids were able to have a place to go after school to do activities. Now it's just kind of like, nope, you can't be here. You got to go outside. You gotta leave and things like that. But things that are near community center, adaptable, yes. I mean, everything we saw last week, those type of schools where you can move things around, we need that, yes. How do we get there, I guess, is the thing, seeing the options and everything, but flexibility in everything. I mean, for seating, tables, chairs, some of our schools don't have windows and fresh air. I mean, these are all things we're going to need, and I'm sure there are things that are going to be included with this, but those are all, not everybody has that. We have a few schools in all of in our region that are perfect examples. Like Cole Kenwood's a perfect example of what I would love a kindergarten to look like. Dominion was just redone. It's a nice refresh on an old building, but it's not going to be flexible. And then our high schools are super old. They're just waiting around till when we can do something. And to see those options, I'm just jealous for my middle school and high school kids that will never see this. So yes, adaptability, flexibility, looking forward to it.
And Tom, I'm sorry, somebody else going to
No,
say
no,
something?
just no good. No, that was just me saying good comments. Go ahead, Mike.
Tom, I wonder with some of those, it's interesting because some of the things that we are applying, those competencies, we're actually in this discussion, which I think is it could possibly be good scaffolding. We're applying these concepts to the building, but the whole portrait is about applying these concepts to development in the kids. Mm-hmm. But maybe this scaffold, maybe this talking about this can help us get there, because if we see if the building itself is not very adaptable, we can see the kind of cues or signals that it might not be sending about, we want this developed in the kids. Mm-hmm. But this might be good scaffolding, because some of these things do apply to the building itself. But we want to take this to the education and development of the kids. Mm-hmm. What do we got there from Shelley? Did I say that right, Shelley?
That's correct.
Shelley, can you describe what you put in there?
That's just an example of a community school initiative out of Chicago, where they bring in academic resources as well as programs to the community, where they locate a school to be a significant spot, and members of the community can sign up and actually receive resources.
So that's another example of how we can open up the buildings to be more flexible for the community to use?
Correct.
Got it. Okay, good example. But again, these are good ideas, because again, if we see the building is pretty rigid, if we see the building does not allow much for the community to use, or doesn't have many other purposes, those are the same cues we're sending about learning and education for the kids too, which makes it more restrictive.
Yep. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Tom and Shaylee. Region 3.
Who's
This
that
is
one,
Julia
Jim?
Lynn.
Okay.
Yeah, Julia Lynn Walker speaking.
Hi,
Can you hear
Julia.
me? Okay,
Yep.
great. Very briefly, I know like 30 years or so, I used to be very comfortable advising students who were high school or undergraduate when they would come and say, well, I need help figuring out what I should major in. And then 20 years ago, I began to be a bit more hesitant because I realized that knowledge was growing at such a rate that I really didn't know. It was very difficult to be able to talk about specific careers because there were new careers coming out every day based on the new body of knowledge. And so I really turned my attention to looking at competencies. And so I really appreciate these six pillars because it is about what is that set of competencies that will enable me to then do whatever needs to be done at whatever point in my life I'm at. Because the other thing I've begun to say to young people who come is say, I'm not going to tell you what you can be. I will help you figure out who you can be. And then you can apply that anywhere because at this point, it's not about one job and a gold watch at 50 years. It's about 4 or 6 jobs in maybe 3 or 4 different states with 4 or 5 different communities. And you have to be able to adapt to them as well as you can. And so I do really, affirm the approach. I've just raised some questions as even Tom did in terms of, the ability of the schools and earlier in terms of the teachers. What do we do to enforce or support the teachers in order to be able to make this transition? And what do we do when the buildings simply cannot be physically changed to adapt to this new model of knowledge? So that's one of this new process. Then two, a lot of the language that's being used in this discussion is really about trauma, but we aren't talking about trauma. So when we talk about empowering and open and flexibility, I think we also have to acknowledge how the changes in the buildings should help to support the trauma that children are being inflicted with throughout the community when they aren't in these buildings. And so what does that mean and what does that look like and how does that space, get developed and be maintained? And then finally, Tiffany's question about or statement about urban agriculture, and she hesitated on master gardeners, and I'm like, master gardeners, that's a certification. But more broadly, there are a few of us within the system who are looking at urban agriculture as a way to address this question of global empathy. And so really being able to say, what are the different cultural attributes that can be attached to agriculture that then enable children to strengthen their own learning capacity across the curriculum, whatever it is. And so that's a kind of an exciting challenge, but it also helps us to say, what the global empathy as well as some of these others now have to be tied to a specific knowledge areas, really to challenge and excite our youth. And I'll stop there.
Good. Yes, I think that was great. I really appreciate that. Can we hear from one of the student leads? Let me see one of my bold future presidents talk. I'm going to call on you if you don't speak up. It's a New York thing. Student lead, we need your thoughts. Safi, Cecily?
I could go ahead and speak.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say adaptability is something that really needs to happen in Region 4, especially within our high schools. I know at Centennial, with incoming freshmen, some of the classes can get a little too small, like the music programs, like our jazz groups and our music groups. Like we have a lot of kids coming in, so bigger classrooms would be nice. And also outside learning resources, because I found out that this year with COVID, our classrooms found it nice to have class outside because we found that everyone was collaborating easily with an outside environment. And it was like more fun to engage in class rather than being stuck in a room with no windows or feeling sheltered in one area. So outside resources was something that I really liked in our discussion.
Well, thank you very much. And I would have to thank everyone for their feedback. this is important that we all have a voice. So appreciate that. We need to use this information to apply it to the process. So again, thank you everyone for your comments and your willingness to step up. What I'd like to do is I'd like to turn it over to Dennis now to talk about next phase.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to touch on a couple of things. Once I get, there we go. All right, just to recap again, some of the discussion for what we did over the Envision phase. And obviously we go through the idea of establishing the mission. And then right away we knew, both as the leadership was communicating to us and as our planning team was discussing, we knew we had the mission. But to help the community discussion go through and move along, we had to come up with an understanding of what do these pillars mean and how they can be responsive within educational design. And we tried to pick a couple of words to help stir the conversation. The first word we chose was agile, and the second word we chose was diverse. With agility, we were thinking of not only the idea of flexible classrooms and the idea of movement, but also relating to learning styles, different people, different types of presentation. And then the idea of expediency. If it takes a while to move around a room, it's not flexible, it's not adaptable, it's not an agile space. So the idea of moving, not only the ability to move around and the ability to be flexible, but how quickly we could do it. And then the idea of diverse spaces. Again, this is a shortened version of the presentation we had during the community discussions. We're just showing a couple of examples. And the idea of diversity is a space that can serve multiple purposes. And again, it's something that Dr. Dixon said about bringing people in and how quickly those spaces, or how easily those spaces can be enveloped to multiple purposes, but also making sure that they're the right purpose. So our question during our community discussion is, how can corridors and cafeterias become adaptable and agile learning spaces? Some of the summary points, and this is a 4-point collection of from all 6 regions, is corridors need to be bigger and rethought. Flexible spaces are important for different learners. Cafeterias should be considered community centers of the schools and not just a place, not just where kids eat or students eat. And then small flexible spaces off of the corridors are great for group work, but not for teaching. The idea of having these open community spaces was not well received amongst our discussion of where students are learning, but where students can. So some of the discussion points for Region 1. And what I'll do is I'll go through these points and then I'll ask Region 1 if there is anything else that they would like to expound on these points. So renovating the buildings to increase line of sight, flexibility of room sizes in elementary and middle school spaces, renovate cafeterias to allow for spaces to use as downtime, special project areas to provide additional educational opportunities, create clustered connector pods to make interconnected spaces based on the educational needs of the students beyond grade level. Is there anyone else from Region 1 that would like to add on to this?
Hello. If I can expound a little bit on the clustered connector pods. Some of the conversation and talk around that was, if you kind of a Montessori type of concept, if you have a space where the classrooms are divided around the one centered space. So then you could have additional opportunities if, instead of pulling kids out, if you have kids of similar abilities and levels that are then clustered into a group, instead of pulling individual students out of classrooms and into separate spaces, you have them into a singular collective group space where it isn't considered a deficiency or something to be pulled out of. That was one of the concepts of the connector pods. And also, if there's a group activity and you have a 3rd grader, you have a 2nd grader, you have a 4th grader, and they all have, again, similar educational abilities and can benefit from this one exercise, regardless of what grade level they're currently in. That would allow them more time to get accelerated opportunities, other fun opportunities, and these cluster connector pods, but still being close to their central classroom. The idea around the renovating the cafeteria to be used as additional space, some of that was considered to be kind of breakouts. So if you have an exploratory zone kind of set up like COSI and the mobile carts, where you could have different experiments, educational opportunities, where you need more kids in one space rather than having this huge space be completely unused for 70% of the day, where you have classrooms that are underutilized, classrooms that are overutilized because you have too many kids in there. You can use your cafeteria space for that, where kids can spread out, have breakouts, have more opportunities to explore, run around, do actual exercises that are learning opportunities in that huge space that is usually not used at all, especially in the high school, middle school. Most of the elementary schools do use the cafeteria space because the cafeteria doubles as a gym. But when you get to the middle and high school grades, that usually isn't used for 50% of the time after you have PE or your health class in that. The use of the corridors in the West Side region, because of the age of our buildings, this was considered something that's not even applicable for most of our buildings. So there was definitely a sense of a lack of equity, because the buildings, some of them are historic. So there are things that you would not be able to do to those spaces. And tearing them down and putting up new buildings would also be a trigger for the community, because they are historic buildings. So there was definitely an equity piece for the corridors and usage of buildings on the West Side, because they just didn't see, unless it's a completely new build, where that would even be applicable.
Thank you very much, Lee. Region 2 had mobile furniture with adaptable configurations, very light modes for sensory learning, partition options, mobile with ability for use for whiteboards, see-through sections and diversified texture, cafeteria sound foam for noise absorption, ability to create mobile learning pods, captioning and language diverse digital media and signage, and student and community gardens and arts. And would anybody from Region 2 like to expand on these?
Thank you, Dennis. Some of the things, we had a variety of feedback with our conversations, but tried to be mindful of being in a global society and citizenship, because oftentimes in the cafeteria or recess or informal spaces, we have an opportunity to learn about one another's culture, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, different types of languages that are represented in our district, which is so phenomenal. And it's quite the asset for Columbus City Schools. And these areas in our signage should have different types of languages on them, different ways for learners, if they are sensory learners or have anything that are considered differences or assets. I don't like to use disabilities as much, but that we're considerate of those things. And our cafeterias lend the opportunity for that. So we emphasized many of the things that the other regions came up with, but texture, diversified learning spaces, being able to change light because some students have sensitivity to light, and there's opportunity in signage with language. And we see English quite a bit, and our district is not only one single language. So it gives us a chance to look at even signage as an opportunity to emphasize global citizenship. So other than what's on the board, just a couple of things I wanted to highlight.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Region 3 discussed centralized cafeterias, wide open hallway spaces, multi-purpose spaces such as Cafe Gymatorium have advantages, also create issues with scheduling overlaps and malfunctioning technology. Consider how to manage, mitigate sound, soundproofing. Sorry, I'm moving my screen around there. Architectural features, etc. Lots of natural lighting, especially in student workspaces, bright colors for movable walls, overhead doors, etc. Invest in quality products that work and require less maintenance. Spaces should be inviting and welcoming. Incorporate built-ins such as seatings and tables and practical flooring that's easy to clean. Anybody else from region, or anyone, pardon me, from Region 3 like to expand on these?
Sure, I can hop in. This is Mike from Region 3. I tried to sort of consolidate the broad consensus from the 5 breakout groups that we had last week. There was quite a bit of focus on educator training and how there were quite a few teachers who attended our session, and it seemed like there was a general feeling of we're feeling that we're not going to get adequate training. We're currently not getting adequate training as it is on the architectural features that are adaptable in the buildings as they are. So if we're going to be greatly enhancing and expanding, that's an opportunity. I won't say, it sounded like it's a challenge now. So it sounds like that's an opportunity to greatly invest in training for staff, and especially training for staff and how they can help students, best utilize and leverage these spaces. The other thing I heard in quite a few groups, I dropped into 4 of the 5 groups, was the question, how are we looking at how students are currently using these spaces in an adaptable way? These were some of the points that were brought up, but have we consulted with students to find out, how they're conceiving and using cafeterias and common corridor spaces? We heard from Safi and we have a few other students with us tonight, but I guess I'm also curious to know how they're currently using those spaces and how they see those spaces, as adaptable within their own school. I think the discussions that, the folks in our discussion sounded like they were having a lot of trouble accessing this at a practical level. And I think, there's a lot of practical content here, but the discussion felt very abstract. Wanting to know what does this actually look like in my school now? How are students using these spaces and how are we incorporating that feedback? That's the only additional point I would make.
Thank you very much. Region 4 also mentioned movable walls for smaller to larger spaces to allow flexibility and small group work. Separate cafeteria spaces preferred over mixed use as a gym cafeteria, especially for hygiene concerns. Wider corridors and halls for transitions between classes for small group work, and more flex space in cafeteria for socializing with outdoor seating and gathering spaces. Would anyone from Region 4 like to expand on these?
Yeah, I think being able to go outside during the day is very important to a lot of the students and people I've talked to. I know at Whetstone High School, they do have some areas where they can get outside and do that during the lunch, but smaller schools, middle school, elementary, that's not an option. And to be able to have that would be nice when they're stuck inside in small classes all day, or if it's like wintertime, you're not going to have that. But, to have, like a gym where they can run around and get some exercise at lunchtime when they, or after lunch. And if you're having a cafeteria and, sometimes those things go back to back. If it's a shared space, you can't go into the gym because it's being used for the cafeteria. So to have those separate spaces is very important. I know some people, I think, back in the day, it seemed like a smart way to kind of, hey, how can we get the most out of this little space or out of this budget? But to have separate space and adequate stuff inside the gyms as well, climbing walls and different things inside a gym besides just baskets. Maybe a place where there's some exercise bikes and things like that. Give kids a chance to, get some energy out so they can go back to their classrooms and pay attention, and they don't have all that pent up energy. So, but yeah, flexibility with movable walls and stuff, that'd be awesome.
Great. Thank you for the feedback. Region 5, they discuss cozy corridors, cultural artwork, language board that reflects all languages in the school, and walls to write on. Would anyone from Region 5 like to expand?
We talked about Mifflin specifically got a grant that enabled them to get the standing desk. So for the kids that fidget a little bit more, I shouldn't call them kids, those are young people because they're high school, but they have that ability to have the standing desk versus to be sitting. They talked about the art pieces. The other thing that they have that's kind of unique is they have a sophomore space where sophomores can congregate and gather and kind of mix and mingle. They do have a senior courtyard, but they would like to see some type of spaces for every grade level, so that, because you're always all passing one another. But instead of study hall in the cafeteria or library, like that could be your gathering space, and you can really get to know your classmates, and you could have meetings there and things like that. That's also a space where you could have counselors come in. Julia Lynn spoke about the traumas in a lot of these communities, and we've lost some Columbus City school children to violence, but having that space where it's their space, they're comfortable in it, and they'll feel comfortable talking about it and getting those feelings out on the table where we can help them. So something like that.
Thank you very much. And Region 6, cafeterias with appropriate space that are not used as performance spaces or gymnasiums, wider spaces that can accommodate large groups of moving people, accessible technology such as computers, laptop stations, screens, projectors, and other presentation technologies, make spaces that are cultural centers for the entire school, hallways like airport terminals, and seating that allows adults and children to physically see eye to eye for conversation. Anyone from Region 6 like to expand?
Just kind of reiterating some of the stuff I talked about before. All of these things people did like to see, but they talk so much more about how they will be used, more so than like this stuff was put out in terms of what they would like to see, but they just continually talk more about the staffing and how this stuff was going to come, to light, because they actually spoke about things that were not happening now. And they talked about buildings kind of being like prisons, or just the room aspect in terms of you're locked in a room for 45 minutes and then you go to another room. So all this stuff that's on here, yeah, we discussed, but it was more about the how than it was about, what it would look like.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clark. The next portion or pillar that we discussed was about communication and how that responds, or how educational can design and respond to that. We're expressive and focused. With expressive, we had an idea of developing trust. This is something that Mr. Nicholson had mentioned about accountability. And you can see that the different learning styles, that students can have the ability to communicate with their teacher outside of a setting of the classroom, communicate amongst themselves, but also the opportunity, that space that you see in the back with the graph, that is a little mini amphitheater. So they do have the experience of presenting themselves and thoughts in front of their peers and in front of their teachers. And then we had the idea of focused communication, the ability for different, going back to different learning styles, providing different colors and textures and avenues of which to sit, congregate, and have a conversation. So this led to the question of what kind of flexible furniture is needed to improve and focus communication in classrooms, STEM labs, and libraries. The number one answer that I can summarize in ours was that the accommodation of students of all sizes. The idea that from, especially like the middle grade levels, the idea of there's just, how do we make kids comfortable? And I know that was the last point, but the idea of having adjustable furniture was probably the most discussed, and in summary, it was the most reviewed thing. Durable and easy to clean, and as we mentioned before, about easily movable and adjustable. And then most of all, the idea that the students need to be comfortable to be successful. Region 1, furniture on wheels and multiple accommodations for kids of various sizes, abilities that allow teachers to quickly reconfigure rooms, reduce usage of space, limiting round tables and standardized furniture, utilize vertical space with the purchase of loft-style dual-purpose furniture, and reimagine classroom spaces for intimate learning with restaurant-style seating. Anyone from Region 1 want to expand?
The part about the loft style and dual purpose furniture, the idea kind of stemmed from what's been going on in New York with their the micro apartments, where you have furniture that is a desk at one point, and then it opens up to a bed or a sofa. Of course, that isn't not for anything in a school to open up to a bed or a sofa, but having furniture that opens up to what maybe it's a 2-story. So you're using the vertical space. And some of our buildings, especially in Region 1, we have very, very tall ceilings. So the vertical space is not utilized at all. So if there's a possibility to have furniture that can be down at one point, and then when your class size increases, you're able to expand and then double. So a desk of 2 is now vertical space, maybe desk of 4. Another thing with the restaurant style seating was having adaptable furniture, so that in our laboratory spaces that are quite stagnant, they can't move the sink at the end of the cabinet style and the huge soapstone tops. If we set it up as restaurant style seating, where you could have maybe groups of 6, groups of 4, groups of 2, and then have it staggered out similar to a restaurant rather than on the corners of the room, that would also allow for different types of group learning. If you have kids where it's just 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 students, you're able to use the furniture to adapt better. And that concept was a restaurant style seating that you can divide up the room and the spaces differently. But specifically on the west side, having multi-purpose furniture that can basically transform into different uses.
That's very creative. I like that loft connection. That's something that's very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, that's for our gentleman from New York.
Fair enough. I agree. Region 2, wipeable and sanitary surfaces, sound absorption desk partitions, tabletop and mobile, diversified technology equipment, including opportunities for virtual learning, hands-on dissection and manipulations, and software upgrades, upgraded intercom systems, darkroom lab ability, soundproof tech and lab capability, open floor plans for group learning, movable partitions, and then nap and self-care stations, furniture for all grade levels. Would anyone from Region 2 like to expand? If not, then we'll move on to Region 3. Durable, lightweight, modular, easy to move around and clean, will need regular replacement. Texture is important, somewhat rough and rigid, others soft and tactile. Different configurations and models for different kinds of experiences, small and large group, more face-to-face. Think about classroom learning versus social recreational versus restorative trauma informed, etc. Have a green screen room, allow experiences that transcend immediate environment. And wheels in certain spaces are a plus, but in general a negative, especially around younger students. Anyone from Region 3 like to expand on these thoughts? Very good, thank you. Region 4, easily cleanable, lightweight, movable, and comfortable. Various size tables and chairs with adjustable heights and locking wheels on the table. Lounging furniture, group design spaces, workshop and carpentry spaces for robotics. Furniture for left-handed students and students with disabilities, even yoga balls and standing desks. Anyone from Region 4 like to comment on any of these? Okay, thank you. Region 5. Drop-down LCD projectors for presentations, camera to record to share with families, multi-purpose spaces for grade levels, health and wellness space, dentist, optometrist, MD, for shadowing and after-school hours open to the community, and items to fit through doorways, even easily movable and lightweight. Anyone from Region 5 like to expand on these? Very good, thank you. Finally, Region 6, reading nooks, furniture that can accommodate children with mobility issues, wheelchairs, orthopedic devices, children of short stature, in all classroom settings. Furniture that allows for group work, use of dry erase markers, flexible grouping and collaborations, versatile and meets multiple needs. Anyone from Region 6 like to expand on these? Okay, great. Thank you very much. And the third portrait of a graduate pillar that we discussed, and something that there were several fantastic comments earlier, were about global empathy. And in regards to educational design for these, what we considered was welcoming, meaning every student, every family should feel welcome in their school and ownership of their learning. And then sustainable. We talked about environment responsibility, the world on display for material selection, air quality, and daylighting. In regards to welcoming, the idea of seeing here is this picture creates an historical context. There's an introduction to a sense of place, and it's empathy for history and being respectful of it. An idea that just because it's old doesn't mean it can't adapt, but how do we adapt it properly, and how do we keep the respect for the history that we have intact? And then sustainable. The interaction of teaching space and natural environment, designing the space for purpose. During my opportunity to present to the regions I had was just the idea that when I had quote unquote outdoor learning, we sat in a circle in the soccer field. It was not representative or conducive to anything learning but how the grass gets pulled out of the ground. Space has to be integrated and usable and connected to the environment around it. That led to the question of where and how would your community use outdoor classroom facilities to teach global empathy and environmental stewardship? The summary that we gathered from the data collected from the 6 regions were outdoor spaces and gardens should be shared with the community. Provide proper utilities so teachers can use the outdoor space like a classroom. Provide covered spaces to use more outdoor space all year round. And all the outdoor spaces should be multi-use and flexible. Region 1, create outdoor areas, also promote and support safety and security of the students and staff. Would anyone from Region 1 like to expand? Okay. Region 2, sorry, I have to move my screen over here. Outdoor greenhouses, auditoriums, and monuments. Waterproof equipment for agriculture and technological, outdoor tent areas and benches, environmental stewardship, gardens, wind turbines, solar panels, sprinkler systems for learning, food insecurity discussions, seeding and pollination, cultural circles, open space sharing and celebrations, community events with presentation space and audio visual capability, engage local neighborhoods and professionals. Would anyone from Region 2 like to expand on anything? Okay, Region 3. Leverage community partnerships to bring outside experiences and organizations to outdoor spaces. Think about weather, durability, and how the curriculum supports the use of outdoor space. Otherwise, a waste to invest. Don't force it. Pay attention to how students are already using outdoor spaces, socially between classes, before and after school, and how to adapt for learning applications. Spaces should be adaptable and covered. More gardens and greenhouses, public art, outdoor art spaces, more art and playgrounds. Consider community access and how it may be used before and after school. Pandemic has shown us the power of technology to bring the outside world. Investments in technology can overcome outdoor limitations. Balance with active experiences that take students off site, nearby parks, cultural spaces, etc. Anyone from Region 3 like to expand on this? Great, thank you. Region 4, flexible lunch spaces for lunch, science, community garden children can interact with, playgrounds for recesses that are not just asphalt, but green spaces, trees and plants that do not need summer care, outside learning center for plant and animal observation, and locate schools near recreation centers for additional opportunities and after-school care that is close and accessible. Anyone from Region 4 like to expand on any points here? Okay. Region 5, covered areas able to use through the majority of all seasons, water resources, hidden outlets for technology use, cultural staples to grow and share with students and community, and greenhouses. Anyone from Region 5 like to expand? Okay, thank you. And in Region 6, green space that students can use, covered space without walls, tables and sitting areas so classrooms can come outside, multifunctional and multi-use, outdoor facilities that are conducive to agricultural pathway where community can also come in and use the space. And a greenhouse is connected to a STEM lab. Anyone from Region 6 like to expand on any of these points? Okay. There is a discussion. Jim, would you like to ask a couple of things?
Yeah. Yep. So, what we really like to do is kind of go through each region, have the regional co-chairs comment on their goals and expectations for facilities now that they've had to listen to the past two phases. So, unfortunately, Lee, I'm going to call on you first. I went the opposite way the last time. So you have goals and expectations for your region from Region 1?
Yes, Region 1 is the west side, and the main priority is equity. We have historic buildings over there, so it's going to take another level of creativity to match some of the items identified in the portrait of a graduate. Using some of our facilities, number one is incubator spaces, using our facilities as trainings. We again have historic buildings, so there's opportunities to train your vocational students and give them practical real world experience in things such as masonry, HVAC, a myriad of items because of the age and condition of our buildings. Another thing as far as a priority for the west side, the district and share with the community how much investment and whether new facilities are going to be built in that area, and how is that going to connect with what is actually going on in the community. Unfortunately, as of late, we've seen some violence over there in some of our areas around our schools. So as we're talking about opening buildings, having adaptable spaces that open up to the outside, and having things that are coming in and out. What are some of the safety and security, and how are we going to adapt and make those measures safe for our students, safe for the community, and safe for our teachers and staff.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. That was really good, because I mean, you actually made my question clearer. You know, what are the things that are important to the region? Partnerships, community hubs, small, large schools, community usage, you know, things like that. What are the big ideas? So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Region 2, Charity.
Thank you. We echo just about the same things that Lee was saying. Hi, Lee. We echo that. And then we also talked about wanting to engage the community a little bit more. The Zoom platform is difficult, and we'd love to do a drive-by. My co-chair had brought it up. Jawanza, he's not on today, but he brought it up even about people driving through and having locations where they can drop in feedback and we can interact with the community on a more organic way. And then with graduations coming up and other things, we just have an opportunity maybe to do some organic touch points with individuals, because parents just might be zoomed out. So we, again, echo a lot of things that Lee said. And then something else was the possibility of using any spaces that may be being phased out or revamped as potential recreation centers and meeting spaces in the community, because that an empty space that's not being used just contributes to blight. It can create blight. But if we can make those into business hubs, transitional housing, social services, recreation centers, we've got the real estate is there, and the use, the necessity for the use is there as well. Even though we're working to update spaces, it just gives us another opportunity. So I won't regurgitate anything that Lee said, but wanted to highlight the drive-through piece and using these buildings for other means.
Thank you very much, Charity. Region 3, Mike.
Sure, thanks, Jim. I guess it would be sort of 3 primary goals. And Julia Lynn, please feel free to tag on to this, but I think number 1, just in general, making this process more accessible for the folks in our region. The discussions so far have been at a very abstract level, and you know, the kinds of nuts and bolts we're talking about are things like tables and chairs. But I think folks really do want to focus on the academics and the curriculum and how the facilities support that. I noticed that Stephen put a comment in the chat about that, and I wholeheartedly agree and have heard that feedback from the folks in our region. So that would be 1. Number 2, just a tighter focus on equity within our regions, and within each individual school within our regions. I think equity has largely been absent so far from this process. And then and number 3 would be just more direct student feedback, right? Students need to be able to see their feedback directly reflected in this plan when we ultimately bring it to the Board of Education. They need to be able to say that their feedback was considered, that they were heard. Just, you know, we're the last week of school, right? We're about to lose them for all intents and purposes for the summer. When we come back in September, we need to make that a priority, and we need to try and do that over the summer as much as we can. But that's a challenge, especially in a year like this. So we need to make sure that student feedback is being heard.
Okay, well, appreciate that. One of the things, if we can try to just speak about expectations and not the process, that would be really helpful for us. Can we get student leads to speak? So when you think, Tom, we'll let Tom go, and then Safi, if you could prepare your thoughts, because you're next after Tom speaks. Is that okay? I'll at least get you to prepare. I won't prepare the adults, but the student, we really want to hear from some of the students. So Tom, and then okay. Safi, if you don't mind, prepare your thoughts, okay? All right.
Like everyone, fair and equitable is something that's very important, I believe, to our region. We want to see what are the best practices of the schools today? Like the schools that are top rated in the state, what are they doing? Why are they the top schools? Like, can we see some examples of what these schools look like, what they have done? And also new up-to-date facilities. We've got some historic buildings, and I think historic's important, but I don't think it's more important than a building that's appropriately going to educate our students and motivate them. You can keep the facade of something and change it around, but we need flexible spaces. And most of these buildings aren't set up to do what schools of today need to do. So keep historic when you can, but make it flexible. And community-focused buildings where the community is involved and can be before school, after school, during school. So these are some of our goals.
Okay. Safi?
Going off of what Tom said about flexibility, I think that's key with updating these schools, because not only do the parents know what's great for the schools, but also the students. And I feel like if we have more student voice, then we might get a deeper look into what we need to change in the schools, because as students, we're in the buildings every single day. We know what needs to be improved. And as new students come into these buildings, they need to feel that they're like at home, because that's what I found at Centennial, and I want other kids to feel the same way as they come into these buildings. So a lot of them have been complaining about no windows, and I don't want them to think of other schools and see that Columbus City Schools is not living up to the expectations they wanted to. So not only do I want us to be our own type of community, but also a community that encourages kids to learn in other flexible environments.
Great, thank you very much. Region 5, we'll let Tiffany, if you could speak, and then Hafsa, if you could, after Tiffany speaks, give your thoughts, please. Tiffany?
Thank you. I echo what everyone else said as far as making sure that the community, more of our stakeholders are involved. I know the summer experience is coming up, and Dr. Dixon, I don't know if there is a way that we can have the students on day one or the last day talk about the things that they'd like to see in their school next year, or when they get to middle school, or when they get to high school, so that we can see their vision too. I think sometimes we as adults know what's best for children, but sometimes children can be our best teachers as far as their best learning environment. So I don't know if there's a way to hold those students, since we have some that are going to that summer experience, and then our juniors and seniors, like in 10 years, when you have children entering the district, what do you expect the school to look like? What would you like to see them offer? Because like someone else said, our children that are currently in school aren't going to see this vision that we have right now. So maybe even get that kind of input from them, because they're leaps and bounds ahead as far as thinking about what is the best learning environment for them.
Thank you, Tiff. Hafsa? Did we lose you? Must have. Well, last but not least, Manny, Region 6.
Yes. So in terms of what we talked about, it was more about the community partnerships, because of so many different things going on in the community, and finding different avenues for kids to basically experience and things for them to get into constructively. So everything that everybody else said, I completely agree with. I just know we touched on the behavior issues and things like that, not to go on a total different tangent, but we touched on that a lot. And it went back to having professionals there that are ready to kind of help give resources and alternatives.
Okay, thank you. Dennis, we'll turn it back over to you. And
All right. So then for step 3 with the define phase, we're going to structure this very similarly because we want to explore the last 3 portions of a portrait of a graduate and how we feel that can embody space and place. So the last 3, creativity, critical thinking, and technology. So what does creativity look like? What kind of space do we provide in there? What do we have for our little learners, our middle grade inventors, and our high school explorers? The idea of what type of environment does a creative environment entail? What type of equipment is in the space? So it's really trying to explore what the space can be. What is a critical thinking space? Making connections and working as individuals that can help the group as a whole, a systematic approach. And what do these different spaces look like from an idea of motivating for growth and change? Technology. How can flexible environments enhance or support both the creation of new technology and the implementation of available technology? And provide an environment to use available technology to suit students' learning styles. So there will be more of the imagery like that as we move forward discussions, and we're still finalizing the what that presentation is going to be and what specifically those discussion questions are. But that was just sort of a lead that we're going to follow a similar format so we can get an idea of how to define space and place to accommodate the pillars of a portrait of a graduate. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about where we're going with this process. So there has been some conversation tonight about, we seem to be talking a little in an esoteric fashion, and what does this mean and how do we do this? And just to recap, through the gather phase, we have learned what parts of the school should be enhanced and what should not be replicated moving forward. We will take what we have learned in the envision phase and what we will learn in the define phase, what types of space are needed and how those spaces should work and how they should be connected in your schools. Starting in September of 2021, we will begin the consider phase, which is shaping of all the learned information into place for initial review. This conceptual design process will be for both new school planning and rejuvenation of existing schools. So the idea of taking everything we've learned and providing the why of putting what we've put down on paper. So there's a transparent and clear understanding of when we start putting these plans together, whether we're reflecting on the renovation of an existing building or moving forward with a new school. Why are we connecting these dots the way we're doing that? We have that background information. We've had those discussions to understand why we're putting what we're putting. And then finally, the transform phase, which we feel will be lasting a few months because we're going to see these concepts and these ideas. And then as we take in all the information of not only cost information and curriculum information and moving staff, that was something that was talked about quite a bit tonight. But how do we move these parts and pieces around to gain consensus around the preferred options? It's all idea of adjusting and evaluating, adjusting, and gaining consensus. So that is my portion of the presentation tonight. Are there any final questions or comments?
Thank you, Dennis. That was really helpful. I know we ran over, but I think the dialogue and interaction was very important. So I appreciate all the co-chairs and the student comments and, Dennis, Dr. Dixon, everyone that participated. So we really want everyone to be involved with the facility master plan. I asked that everybody go to the district facility master plan site, fill out the Envision survey, so we could make sure that every voice is heard. And we also asked you to watch out for the June community conversation. There should be more information about that.
Jim, I
So-
do have one other additional point I'd like to add in.
Yeah.
In response to some of the concerns that were voiced this evening, we are in the process of submitting age-appropriate student surveys. We've split up the surveys in 4 different age groups, so those will be released in very short order. And then in September, when we start the consider phase, we're still coming up with how we are going to involve the students with the conceptual planning of what we're going to be doing. So I just wanted to mention that before, that we are approaching the students and we have a plan in place. It's just putting that plan in action. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So, Dr. Dixon, before I just officially adjourn, is there any closing comments you'd like to make?
No, just thank you. We hear you, and thank you so much for your feedback. We have lots of work to do. We're going to get feedback from more of our students and others. Just to really appreciate the time that everyone has given to this, and we're going to get there. And if that means we have to go back and do some extra work, we will. We want to make sure our voices are represented. So again, thank you to our chair and our others who have been doing this work with us since the start. And I really appreciate the time you've given thus far.
Yep, thank you, everyone. Our meeting is officially adjourned. Have a wonderful evening.